Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. Lila was a silhouette against the vast prairie, her auburn hair ablaze beneath the setting sun. Astride her horse, she moved with untamed elegance, an extension of the plains themselves, like the willows fringing the creek. Seth leaned against the weathered fence, the sun-baked wood warming his palm, his gaze tracking her effortless progress. He wasn't merely watching, he was attuned to the land's pulse, the subtle premonitions it offered. Today, those premonitions carried an ominous weight. The very atmosphere seemed to thrum with a dissonant chord. The corralled horses shuffled anxiously, their ears flicking nervously, and the breeze, usually a playful caress, now felt sharp, almost cruel. Seth's gaze swept the horizon, his eyes squinting against the radiant glare. Nothing. Just the unending expanse of tawny grassland and the distant, hazy indigo of the mountains. Yet, the feeling persisted, a nagging disquiet burrowing deep within him. He recalled a different vista, a time when the air had crackled with similar menace. The sky bruised with smoke, the death throes of the innocent, the coppery reek of spilled blood memories he suppressed, entombed beneath layers of silence and resolve. Memories of what forged his unbreakable debt to rancher James. James had rescued him, a shattered boy clinging to life amidst the ruins of his family's homestead. He offered not pity, but purpose, a place to not merely survive, but to belong. He'd taught him horsemanship, marksmanship, and how to interpret the land's secrets. He'd resurrected his will to live. And when, years afterward, James had met his gaze squarely and entrusted him with his daughter's safety, Seth hadn't wavered. It wasn't a request, it was a sacred pledge. An oath branded onto his very core, binding him to this land, to this family. Lila was more than simply the rancher's offspring. She was a beacon, radiant and free-spirited, a striking contrast to his own subdued, haunted existence. He admired her resilience, her unwavering conviction in humanity's innate goodness, even when the world offered scant evidence of it. He perceived her frailty too, the trepidation she diligently masked behind a veneer of fortitude. And he knew, with an unwavering certainty, that he would safeguard her at any cost, even if it required confronting the demons he had so desperately sought to outrun. He detached himself from the fence, his movement precise and controlled. He needed to be prepared, vigilant. He strode towards the barn, his boots stirring up dust, the sinking sun painting elongated, foreboding shadows ahead. Inside, the familiar medley of hay, leather tack, and equine musk engulfed him. He ran a hand over the smooth, age-worn stock of his rifle, testing its mechanism, the weight a comforting presence. He maintained it meticulously, always primed. As was he. Emerging back into the open, his gaze instinctively gravitated towards the horizon. And there, in the distance, they materialized. Initially, they were mere specks, dark flecks against the fading luminescence. But as they advanced, their shapes sharpened. Riders. Far too numerous. Moving with an intent that was far from friendly. He recognized their riding style, the tattered attire, the gleam of weapons. Creek Barlow and his band. A cold fist clenched around his insides. He had heard tales of Barlow, of his brutality, his insatiable hunger for more. He had dismissed them as apocryphal, campfire yarns concocted to frighten tenderfoots. But now, witnessing them bearing down on the ranch, the whispers crystallized into a chilling reality. He watched Lila, oblivious, still riding with the carefree spirit of someone untouched by true terror. He had to reach her, forewarn her. He seized his horse, a robust, dependable Appaloosa named Shadow, and saddled him swiftly, his movements economical and ingrained. He swung into the saddle, the leather groaning softly beneath him, and urged Shadow forward, galloping across the open range towards Lila. The wind lashed at his hair, carrying the tang of dust and peril. He could feel the earth vibrating beneath Shadow's pounding hooves, the urgency propelling him onward. He risked a glance back at the approaching figures. They were closer now, their faces discernible in the waning light, hardened countenances, pitiless countenances. He spurred Shadow onward, pushing him to his uttermost limit. He had to reach Lila before they did. Shield her. He had sworn an oath, and he would honor it, whatever the sacrifice. He bellowed her name, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind's howl. Lila. She finally pivoted, her eyes widening as she spied him racing towards her, his expression grave, his posture taut. She reined in her mount, her features shifting from bewilderment to apprehension. He reached her, drawing Shadow to a sliding halt beside her. He leaned down, his tone urgent. Barlow. He's coming. Her eyes grew wide, her hand instinctively flying to her mouth. Barlow? But why? He wants the ranch, Seth said, his voice strained. We need to get back to the house. Now. He didn't pause for debate. He seized her reins, guiding her horse back towards the ranch. They rode frantically, abreast, the relentless drumbeat of their horses' hooves against the soil, a desperate competition against encroaching time. As they surmounted a slight rise, they could discern the ranch house in the distance, a small pool of light in the approaching gloom. But they could also see Barlow and his men, significantly closer now, their horses churning up a plume of dust as they surged forward. Lila gasped, her eyes brimming with dread. They'll reach it before us. Seth offered no assurance. He simply tightened his grip on her reins, imploring his horse to greater speed. He knew they were running out of leeway. A confrontation loomed. And he knew he would do whatever was required to safeguard Lila, even if it meant forfeiting everything he possessed. He glanced at Lila, noting the fear etched on her face, but also the unwavering resolve. She was afraid, but unbroken, prepared to defend her home, her family's birthright. He would stand beside her, shoulder to shoulder, until the bitter end. The wind shrieked around them, carrying omens of an approaching tempest, whispers of savagery and demise. But amidst the encroaching darkness, a spark of hope persevered, a hope forged from devotion, from valor, and from a promise that could not be violated. They pressed onward, towards the ranch, towards the looming night, their hearts thudding with a fusion of terror and steadfast purpose. The fate of the ranch, and perhaps their very existence, hung precariously, and Seth understood, with a grim certainty, that the clash was imminent. The price of land, the dust cloud arrived like a premonition, swallowing the horizon whole. It wasn't the gentle haze of a passing breeze. It was a churning, suffocating brown that promised something far more sinister. Lila watched it from the porch, the rifle heavy in her hands, the metal cold against her sweat-slick palms. The air hung thick and still, every bird silenced, every rustle of leaves hushed in anticipation. James stepped out beside her, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the approaching threat. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The lines etched deep in his face told a story of hard-won battles and sacrifices made. He'd built this ranch from nothing, brick by painful brick, and he wasn't about to surrender it now. Seth emerged from the barn, his movements fluid and silent as a shadow. He carried his rifle with an easy familiarity, a part of him as natural as his own skin. He scanned the perimeter, his eyes narrowed, assessing the landscape, calculating distances, identifying potential cover. He didn't offer words of comfort, didn't offer empty platitudes. His presence was a promise in itself, a shield forged in loyalty and tempered by years of unspoken understanding. The riders crested the hill, a ragged line of men and horses silhouetted against the dying sun. Creek Barlow rode at their head, his broad frame imposing even at a distance. He was a force of nature, brutal and unforgiving, leaving a trail of broken dreams and shattered lives in his wake. He stopped just beyond the property line, the dust settling around him like a malevolent aura. "James!" Barlow's voice boomed across the distance, rough and gravelly, carrying the weight of menace. "Come on out, old man. Let's not make this any harder than it has to be." James spat on the ground, a gesture of defiance. "This is my land, Barlow. You and your vultures ain't welcome here." Barlow laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. "Your land? You're living on borrowed time, James. Time to pay up." He gestured to the surrounding land, the golden field stretching as far as the eye could see. "This ain't a life for a woman, James. Especially not alone." Lila bristled, her grip tightening on the rifle. She hated the way Barlow spoke about her, like she was a fragile trinket to be bartered or discarded. She was more than her gender. She was her father's daughter, and she was a survivor. "I ain't selling," James declared, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "This land is my legacy. It's all I have to leave my daughter." "Legacy?" Barlow scoffed. "You call this a legacy? A patch of dirt that'll be blown away by the next storm? Don't be a fool, James. Take the money and run. Save your daughter the trouble." Seth shifted slightly, his gaze never leaving Barlow. He registered the subtle movements of the other riders, the way they fidgeted in their saddles, the glint of steel beneath their coats. He knew they were itching for a fight, eager to spill blood for a promise of riches. "There's no amount of money that could buy this land," Lila said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the tension. "This is our home, and we're not leaving." Arlo's eyes narrowed, his gaze locking on Lila. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made her skin crawl. It wasn't just greed, it was something darker, something more personal. "Such spirit," Barlow said, his voice dangerously low. "It's a shame to see it wasted. I'd hate for anything to happen to you, Miss James. Such a pretty thing." James stepped forward, shielding Lila with his body. "Leave her out of this, Barlow. This is between you and me." "Everything's between you and me, James," Barlow said, his smile cruel. "You just didn't know it until now." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "I'm giving you one last chance, James. Sell me the land, and I'll let you walk away. Refuse, and well, let's just say things could get messy." James didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. "I refuse." Barlow let out a long, slow breath. "All right, James. You made your choice." He raised his hand, signaling to his men. "Take the ranch." The riders surged forward, a wave of horses and steel crashing towards the house. Lila raised her rifle, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was coming. She'd known it all along. Seth moved, a blur of motion, positioning himself between Lila and the advancing riders. He didn't shout, didn't issue threats. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel, a shield against the storm. His eyes, cold and resolute, met Barlow's. In that moment, Barlow saw something in Seth's gaze that gave him pause a depth of resolve that transcended mere loyalty. It was the kind of quiet fury that could turn the tide of any battle. James grabbed a rifle from inside the house, his hands surprisingly steady. He took up a position beside Seth, his eyes narrowed, a grim determination on his face. He might be old, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Lila took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. Fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. She had a ranch to defend, a legacy to protect, and a promise to uphold. The air crackled with anticipation, the silence broken only by the thundering hooves of the approaching riders. The fight for the James Ranch had begun. The price of land would be paid in blood and sweat, in courage and sacrifice. And in the heart of it all, Seth stood ready, his promise a weight on his soul, his loyalty a fire in his eyes. He would protect Lila, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Because some promises, once made, could never be broken. A promise in blood, the first bullet shattered the quiet of the afternoon, ripping through the wooden porch railing like a hot knife through butter. It was the signal. Mayhem erupted. Creek Barlow's men, a swarm of locusts in human form, descended upon the ranch. Gunfire cracked, glass shattered, and screams pierced the air, tearing through the illusion of peace James had so carefully cultivated. James roared. A sound ripped from the depths of his soul, and returned fire from behind the overturned kitchen table, his face grim, a warrior protecting his last stand. Lila, heart hammering against her ribs, scrambled beside him, loading the spare rifle with trembling hands. Seth moved like a phantom, a shadow flitting between the barn and the house, his Winchester singing a deadly tune. Each shot was precise, calculated, aimed to neutralize, not kill yet. He was buying them time, a precious commodity quickly dwindling. He saw one of Barlow's men trying to flank the house, moving low through the tall grass. Seth dropped him with a single shot. Inside, the air grew thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. James took a bullet to the shoulder, staggering but refusing to fall. He gritted his teeth, the pain a grim reminder of what he was fighting for. "Lila, get down!" he bellowed, firing again, his movements growing sluggish. Lila, ignoring his command, pressed a damp cloth against his wound. "Papa, you're hurt bad." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were hard, reflecting the fire raging around them. "I'll be fine," James rasped, though his face was ashen. He knew this was a lie, a desperate attempt to shield her from the truth. Another bullet splintered the table beside them, showering them with wood fragments. He grabbed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Listen to me, Lila. You need to get out of here." "I'm not leaving you," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "You have to," he insisted, his voice urgent. He looked towards Seth, who was now pinned down behind the barn, exchanging fire with several of Barlow's men. "Seth will take care of you. He promised me." Suddenly, the door burst open, and Creek Barlow stood silhouetted in the doorway, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Well, well, James. Looks like your luck has finally run out." James shoved Lila behind him, leveling his rifle at Barlow. "Get off my land, Creek." His voice was low, dangerous. "Your land?" Barlow chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "This land belongs to whoever can take it." He raised his own gun, a gleaming Colt peacemaker. Before he could fire, Seth exploded through the window, tackling Barlow to the ground. The two men wrestled, a tangle of limbs and fury. Lila seized the opportunity, grabbing her father's rifle and aiming it at the remaining men outside. James, weakened by blood loss, slumped against the wall. He knew he was dying. He looked at Lila, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and despair. "Lila," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll keep the ranch alive, even if I'm not here." Lila's resolve hardened. She met her father's gaze, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I promise, Papa. I promise." A shot rang out, cutting through the chaos. Seth, still locked in combat with Barlow, watched in horror as James crumpled to the floor, a crimson stain blooming on his chest. Barlow, taking advantage of Seth's distraction, kneed him in the groin, sending him sprawling. He scrambled to his feet, spitting blood. Lila screamed, dropping the rifle and rushing to her father's side. She cradled his head in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "Papa, please, don't leave me." James reached up, his hand trembling as he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "Lila, be strong like your mother." He coughed, blood bubbling from his lips. "Seth, protect her." His eyes fluttered closed, and his hand went limp. Lila sobbed, her grief a raw, primal sound. Seth, his face a mask of fury and sorrow, stood over her, his body a shield against the encroaching darkness. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had failed. He had failed to protect James. But he wouldn't fail Lila. He couldn't. Barlow, dusting himself off, sneered at them. "Well, that was easier than I expected. Now, about that ranch." Seth ignored him. He knelt beside Lila, his voice a low growl. "We have to go, now." Lila shook her head, clinging to her father's body. "I can't leave him." Seth gently pried her hands loose, his touch surprisingly gentle. "He's gone, Lila. Staying here means you'll die too. He wouldn't want that." He looked into her tear-filled eyes, his own reflecting a silent promise. "I swear to you, Lila, I will protect you. I will get you out of here, and I will keep you safe. That's a promise I made to your father, and I intend to keep it." He lifted her to her feet, his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. He grabbed the discarded rifle, his gaze sweeping the burning ranch. The outbuildings were ablaze, flames licking at the sky, casting long, dancing shadows. Barlow's men were looting the house, their laughter a cruel counterpoint to Lila's sobs. "We go now," Seth said, his voice devoid of emotion. He knew that to survive, he had to bury his own grief, to transform it into a cold, hard resolve. He would mourn James later. Now, he had a promise to keep. He led Lila out the back door, away from the chaos and the flames. They moved silently, like ghosts, disappearing into the gathering dusk, leaving behind the burning wreckage of their former life. They were leaving behind a grave, a legacy, and a promise etched in blood. The weight of that promise settled heavily on Seth's shoulders, a burden he would carry until his dying day. He glanced back at the inferno, the flames painting the sky a hellish orange, and knew that their journey had just begun. Sanctuary of grief, the cabin was more diminutive than Lila recalled, nestled in a hollow where pines gossiped secrets to the breeze. Weather had silvered its log edifice, daubed with moss and earth, yet it stood, a stoic monument to a life intentionally lived apart. Seth shoved the door inward. It emitted a grating shriek, hinges stiff from neglect. Golden dust motes pirouetted in the thin shafts of light cutting through the dimness. The air tasted of sun-baked needles, fecund earth, and echoes of bygone summers. Just outside, Lila's face was a study in pallor against the failing light. She ran her fingers along the corrugated bark of a pine, as if deciphering an old forgotten script. The conflagration had ravaged more than just the ranch. It had robbed her of her moorings. Seth watched, his own sorrow a leaden weight in his stomach. He recognized that bewildered look. He'd worn it himself, ages before, when illness had claimed his kin. "It's smaller," she breathed, her voice a fragile thing. Seth grunted, retreating a step. "Suffice, it's cover." He noted the tremor in her hands, the valiant effort to maintain composure. "Come on, inside with you." He ushered her in, his hand a light pressure at the small of her back. Inside, he located a battered tin pan and a pail near the dry sink. He trekked to the spring he remembered, the water shockingly cold as it stung his skin. Returning, he dampened a cloth and knelt before Lila, perched rigidly on a wobbly stool. "Let's see that arm," he murmured, his tone gruff yet threaded with a tenderness he kept carefully veiled. She winced as he tended to the burns, the surrounding flesh inflamed. He labored silently, his brow creased in concern. Lila observed him, her gaze unwavering. She'd witnessed Seth in combat, seen him take lives, but never like this gentle, almost solicitous. "Pa always reckoned you were a decent man, Seth," she murmured. He hesitated, his hand poised on her arm. "Your pa had good instincts then." He averted his eyes, intent on his ministrations. The quiet stretched, thick with words unuttered. Finished, he rifled through a musty trunk, unearthing a clean, if threadbare, cotton shirt. "This'll drown you, but it's better than those tattered rags." Lila accepted the shirt, their fingers briefly meeting. "I'm obliged, Seth." He rose abruptly. "I'll see to a fire." He set about gathering kindling, the repetitive thud of the axe a defiant rhythm against the silence threatening to engulf them. Embers soon took hold, painting the walls with flickering silhouettes. Lila watched him from the stool, the flames mirrored in her pupils. As the cabin shed its chill, the vise around Lila's chest loosened fractionally. Her gaze swept the space, cataloging familiar details. The nicked enamelware on the shelf, the time-worn quilt draped across the cot, the handcrafted wooden avians suspended from the rafters. Her father had crafted each one, a homage to a different bird he'd spotted on the ranch. Reaching, she delicately touched one, a diminutive wren with a damaged wing. A solitary tear escaped, carving a glistening trail down her cheek. She scrubbed at it fiercely, but a torrent followed. She could no longer contain them. The sorrow she had suppressed, the shock that had kept her immobile, shattered its dam. Seth pivoted at the sound of her weeping. He hesitated, uncertain, before crossing to her and kneeling. He offered no words, no hollow reassurances. He remained a silent sentinel, a steadfast bulwark against her maelstrom. Lila succumbed, burying her face in his shoulder. He was rough-hewn and implacable, yet, in that moment, undeniably a haven. She wept for her father, for her homestead, for the existence snatched so brutally away. Eventually her sobs ebbed, leaving her hollowed and spent. She drew back, her face reddened and puffy. "I'm sorry," she whispered, avoiding his gaze. Seth merely shrugged. "No need for apologies." "They murdered him, Seth," she choked, her voice laced with anguish. They'd just murdered him, as if he were worthless. A muscle pulsed in Seth's jaw. He knew that corrosive feeling, the scalding, all-consuming fury that threatened to obliterate everything in its path. "I know," he rumbled, his tone low and dangerous. "What do we do now?" she implored, her eyes searching his. "What am I supposed to do?" He studied her, the girl transmuted into a woman, burdened by bereavement and apprehension. He glimpsed the ember of defiance that still flickered in her gaze. He understood he couldn't shield her from the agony, but he could aid her in bearing it. "We're going to pull through," he stated, his voice resolute. "We'll plot what comes next, and we're going to see them answer for what they've done." The vow hung between them, unspoken yet weighty. A promise forged in sorrow and rage, one that would bind them together in the days ahead. Lila inclined her head, her gaze hardening. "I want to learn to shoot," she asserted, her voice unwavering. "I want to absorb everything you know." Seth locked eyes with her, his own mirroring her resolve. "Then I will teach you." The burden of his pledge to James settled even more oppressively on his shoulders. No longer was it solely about shielding Lila now. It was about aiding her in reclaiming what had been stolen, about honoring the memory of a man who had entrusted him with everything. He fixed his gaze on the blaze, a silent oath solidifying within him. He would not fail them. He would not fail her. Secrets of the ranch, the blaze had consumed more than just her dwelling. It had plundered her orientation, her grasp of the terrain she believed intimately familiar. Now, confined within Seth's austere cabin, the silence bore down like a reprimand. Lila's gaze remained fixed on the hearth's embers, the leaping flames mirroring her inner chaos. She'd postured as a distressed maiden, yet the truth lay dormant, buried under the ranch's charred remains, awaiting rediscovery. "There's more to this place than you know," she murmured, her voice a mere thread. Seth, who had been honing his blade in quiet concentration, stilled his hand, his eyes locking onto hers with inscrutable intensity. "Elaborate," he invited, his tone carefully even. Lila stalled, the burden of her family's history heavy on her spirit. "My father, his life here was multifaceted." Seth offered no encouragement beyond his continued regard, urging her forward. He anticipated this. He made preparations. Lila drew a steadying breath. Defense measures, hidden caches, strategically positioned. Only he and I knew their locations. A crease appeared on Seth's brow, a brief flash of surprise illuminating his features. "Defenses? Of what kind?" "Traps, fortified shelters, concealed gun nests commanding key approaches. He devised them himself, ages ago, after tangling with some claim jumpers. He believed a man must be prepared to defend his own." Lila paused, her eyes darkening with a blend of pride and grief. "He schooled me in their use, their upkeep. I know this land as intimately as he once did." Slowly, Seth placed his knife upon the table, the metallic sound reverberating in the confined space. He scrutinized Lila, a newfound respect kindling in his gaze. "Why the delay in revealing this?" Lila shrugged, avoiding his scrutiny. Perhaps I sought your protection through perceived helplessness, but that is not who I am." "Indeed," Seth affirmed, his voice subdued. He leaned back, mulling over her words. "Where can these caches be found?" Lila recounted their locations, verbally sketching a detailed map of the ranch. She described the artificial rock face concealing a small arsenal, the expertly camouflaged pit teeming with preserved rations and munitions, the subterranean passage leading to a secret spring. Seth listened intently, absorbing every detail, his mind already assessing the tactical advantages these provisions conferred. Yet there remained more. A secret entrusted to her by her father only months prior to his demise. A secret poised to alter everything. "There's something else," Lila breathed, almost inaudibly. "Something my father revealed just before the fire." Seth's expression hardened, his gaze sharpening. "Tell me." Lila hesitated once more, the secret weighing heavily. "He unearthed something on the property. Something of worth. Mineral veins. Silver. Perhaps even gold." Seth's face remained a mask. "Gold? On his holdings?" "He shrouded it in secrecy," Lila clarified. "He feared the trouble it would bring. He was proven right." The silence stretched taut between them, punctuated only by the hearth's crackling song. Seth rose and moved to the window, his gaze sweeping the snow-draped expanse. The revelation of valuable minerals on the ranch fundamentally shifted the equation. It transcended mere vengeance. It encompassed avarice, dominance, the brutal depths to which men would descend for fortune. "Barlow," Seth rumbled, his voice a low threat. "He possessed knowledge," Lila confirmed with a grim nod. "He had to. That's why he coveted the land. It wasn't solely about eviction. It was about seizing what my father had discovered." Seth pivoted back, his eyes blazing with nascent resolve. "This forces a change in approach. Greater cunning, heightened vigilance are imperative. Barlow will resort to any measure to seize his prize." He examined Lila anew, now seeing not a sorrowful daughter seeking retribution, but a formidable woman who knew the land's every contour. He had underestimated her, mistaking her for an encumbrance, but she was a powerful ally, a partner, a force to be respected. "You possess intimate knowledge of this land," Seth stated, a hint of warmth softening his voice. "You are familiar with these defenses. We will utilize them. We will exact payment from Barlow for his transgressions." Lila returned his gaze, her eyes burning with a fusion of fury and resolve. "We will," she affirmed, her voice resolute. "He will answer for his actions." The fire danced and hissed, casting shifting shadows across their countenances. In that instant, a tacit understanding solidified between them. Seth was no longer merely a protector, and Lila no longer simply a casualty. They were confederates, united by shared bereavement and common purpose. The ranch's secrets had been laid bare, and the battle for justice had only just commenced. Seth returned to the table and retrieved his knife, its steel reflecting the fire's glow. He resumed sharpening it, the rhythmic rasp providing a constant beat against the silence. He had pledged to safeguard Lila, a vow he intended to uphold. But he now understood that protecting her entailed more than simply shielding her from danger. It meant liberating her potential, empowering her to fight for herself, and standing beside her as they reclaimed what was rightfully theirs. The weight of the promise persisted, but it had taken on a new form. It was no longer a burden, but a bond forged in fire, seasoned by loss, and fortified by the ranch's veiled truths. Lessons in survival, the air tasted of ash and regret. A bitter tang that clung to the back of Lila's throat. She stood rigid, fists balled, observing Seth. He'd carved out a training ground near the barn's remains, a bare patch of earth beneath a skeletal framework of charred timbers that clawed at a bruised, perpetual twilight sky. "This is where we begin," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "Staying alive demands more than just weaponry. It's knowing what your body can do, how it reacts under pressure." A tight knot formed in Lila's throat, making swallowing difficult. I'm no fighter. Seth's gaze remained steady, unwavering. Then you'll become one. He tossed her a worn leather belt. Fasten that. It'll guard your vital organs. Her fingers, clumsy and uncooperative, struggled with the buckle. He closed the distance, his rough hand momentarily covering hers as he adjusted the fit. An unexpected current, jarring and unwelcome, pulsed through her. She recoiled. First, equilibrium, Seth stated, ignoring the spark. Feet planted, shoulder width, knees flexed. Find your center. Lila mirrored his stance, feeling awkward, exposed. He circled her, eyes like chips of flint, assessing her posture. Unbalanced, too much tension. Loosen your shoulders, breathe deep. He placed a hand on her spine, gently correcting her alignment. The unexpected contact sent another unwelcome shiver down her spine, a jarring awareness of his proximity. It was infuriating, this distraction. Her focus had to be razor-sharp, aimed at survival, at retribution for her father, not whatever this was. "Seth," she managed, her voice tight with controlled frustration. "I need to concentrate." He dropped his hand, his expression impossible to read. "Then do it." "I won't pull punches, Lila." "Neither will Barlow." He launched a slow, almost theatrical jab. Lila recoiled, stumbling back, caught off guard. Too slow. You have to react without thinking. Hours bled into a relentless cycle of blocks, dodges, and clumsy counterattacks. The sun was a relentless hammer. Dust devils danced, cloaking them in a gritty film. Lila's muscles screamed in protest, each movement a fresh agony. Frustration gnawed at her. She lunged, her fist whistling harmlessly past Seth's ear. He sidestepped with effortless grace, his motions economical and precise. Again, he directed, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "I can't," Lila wheezed, swiping at the sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. "I'm spent." "Think Barlow will offer you a break." His words were a slap in the face, a necessary jolt. He was right, of course. She straightened, her jaw clenched. "Show me something that works." He demonstrated a simple elbow strike, explaining the physics with succinct clarity. Lila practiced, cautiously at first, then accelerating with each repetition, channeling her rage into the movement. A spark of satisfaction ignited as she connected with the padded target Seth offered. "Better," he conceded, his tone grudging. "But speed alone won't win it. You need intent." He stepped back, his gaze pinning her. "You have to crave victory, Lila. You have to be willing to do anything, everything, to achieve it." The intensity of his look stole her breath. She saw something raw in his eyes, a shared darkness, a familiar echo of pain. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I will." That night, after a meager supper of beans and stale bread, Lila found Seth by the creek, meticulously cleaning his rifle. Moonlight painted the ravaged landscape in stark relief, casting elongated, spectral shadows. She hesitated before approaching. "Seth?" He glanced up, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Can't sleep?" "I'm aching," she confessed, the word drawn out. "And his face, it keeps replaying in my head." "Her father." Seth nodded, understanding etched into his features. "That fades with time." "You knew him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling, fragile. "My father?" "He was a good man," Seth said, his voice low and respectful. "Honest." He didn't deserve any of this. "Why are you doing this, Seth?" she asked, her voice laced with bewilderment. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, his focus returning to the rifle. "I gave him my word," he disclosed, the words measured, "to keep you safe." "But why?" she persisted. "He saved you, you told me, but this transcends repayment." He offered no response, his silence thick with unspoken burdens. Lila felt a tangled mix of gratitude and irritation. She yearned to decipher him, to glimpse the man hidden behind the stoic mask, but he maintained his distance. "Do you think I can actually do this?" she asked, her voice threaded with uncertainty. "Do you believe I can stand up to Creek Barlow?" Seth finally met her gaze, his eyes intense. "I wouldn't waste my time if I didn't." His gruff confidence was a lifeline. She latched onto it, drawing strength from his unwavering faith in her. However taciturn. Days morphed into weeks. The training became more punishing. Lila mastered tracking, hunting, and snare setting. Her marksmanship improved steadily, her aim honing with each shot. She learned to fight, her movements becoming more fluid, intuitive. One afternoon, during a sparring session, Lila managed to wrench the knife from Seth's grip, the blade glinting under the sun. She held him at bay, her chest heaving, her eyes ablaze with a hard-won victory. "Not bad," he admitted, a flicker of a smile gracing his lips. "You learn quickly." Lila lowered the knife, a wave of fierce pride washing over her. She was evolving, becoming stronger, more resilient than she ever believed possible. But the transformation went deeper than mere physical prowess. Her grief slowly gave way to a burning need for justice. As she headed back to the desolate remains of the house, Seth's words resonated in her mind. "You have to crave victory. You have to be willing to do anything, everything." She knew what had to be done. She had to avenge her father's murder. She had to reclaim her home, her life, and she had to confront Creek Barlow, regardless of the cost. That night, she lay sleepless, staring at the vast expanse of stars framed by the gaping hole in the roof. The immense weight of her promise, her vow to her father, pressed down on her. But beneath that weight, she detected something else, a nascent spark of hope, a flicker of fierce resolve. She was no longer merely a rancher's grieving daughter. She was a survivor, forged in fire, and she was prepared for the fight. Seth observed her from the shadows, his own internal turmoil a constant battle. He witnessed the newfound fire in her eyes, the unyielding steel in her spine. He recognized that she was ready as she could be. Yet, he couldn't quell the insidious fear that he was leading her towards a precipice from which there was no return. He had pledged to protect her, to safeguard her. But protecting her entailed preparing her for war. And that war might demand everything from her, even her very essence. And perhaps, just perhaps, his own. He cursed the oath he'd sworn, how it tethered him to her destiny, how her mere presence stirred something dormant within him, something he believed had been extinguished long ago. He was a shield, nothing more. That was his sole purpose. Any deviation from that was a betrayal of everything he represented. Yet, the fire in her eyes threatened to melt the glacial ice encasing his heart, and he dreaded the inevitable moment when he could no longer resist its allure. Hunted the wind carried the scent of wood smoke further than it should have. Seth knew it even before he saw the flicker of torchlight through the trees. He'd been careless, letting the fire burn too hot, too long. He cursed himself, the tightness in his chest a familiar ache. His mistakes always cost him. Lila was inside, sharpening her knife. The rhythmic scrape of steel against stone was a constant now, a counterpoint to the silence they lived in. He stepped into the cabin, his movements fluid, silent. "Company," he said, his voice low. "Arlo's men, they're close." Lila didn't flinch. She simply stopped sharpening, the steel still singing softly. Her eyes, usually bright with a challenging fire, were cold and focused. "How long?" "Not long. They know we're here." He started extinguishing the fire, kicking dirt over the embers until the last spark was smothered. "We move. Now." He grabbed the pack he'd prepared weeks ago, anticipating this moment. It held essentials: dried meat, ammunition, a map, and a small pouch of gold. He handed Lila a rifle, its weight seeming to settle her further. She checked the chamber, her movements precise, practiced. She was a quick study, but he still saw the girl she was, beneath the hardened exterior. He was failing her, turning her into something else. They slipped out the back, melting into the dense forest. The air was cold, biting at their exposed skin. The moon was a sliver, barely enough to cast shadows. Seth led the way, moving with a practiced ease, his senses alert. He knew these woods, every hollow and ridge. Barlow's men might be ruthless, but they were city boys, unfamiliar with the harsh realities of the mountains. "How did they find us?" Lila's voice was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. "Doesn't matter now. We need to focus on getting away." He didn't want to tell her he'd been careless. Didn't want to see the disappointment in her eyes. They moved quickly, silently, weaving through the trees. Seth chose their path carefully, sticking to the shadows, using the terrain to their advantage. He could hear the sounds of their pursuers behind them, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the occasional curse. They were getting closer. He stopped abruptly, holding up a hand to silence Lila. He crouched low, listening intently. "They're splitting up," he murmured, "trying to flank us." He scanned the terrain, his mind racing. They needed to create a diversion, buy themselves some time. He pointed to a steep ravine. "Down there. Fast." They scrambled down the slope, the loose earth sliding beneath their feet. At the bottom, a small stream gurgled over the rocks. They waded through the icy water, hoping to throw off their scent. "This is insane," Lila said, her teeth chattering. But there was a strange excitement in her voice, a thrill he recognized. The danger was awakening something within her, something fierce and untamed. He didn't reply. He was too busy listening. The sounds of their pursuers were still there, but they were more distant now, confused. The stream had worked. For now. They climbed out of the ravine on the other side, their clothes soaked, their bodies shivering. Seth knew they couldn't stay here. They needed to keep moving, put as much distance as possible between themselves and Barlow's men. As they moved, Lila stumbled, her foot catching on a root. She cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound. "Lila!" Seth reached for her, steadying her. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her face pale. "Just twisted my ankle, I think." He examined her ankle, his touch gentle but firm. It was already swelling. "It's bad. You can't walk far on this." She bit her lip, trying to hide the pain. "I can keep going." He looked at her, his expression unyielding. "No, we need to find shelter. Somewhere we can defend." He scanned the surrounding area, his eyes searching for any sign of cover. He spotted a small cave hidden behind a thicket of bushes. "There. It's not much, but it's better than nothing." He helped her to the cave, his arm around her waist. She leaned heavily on him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cave was small, damp, and cramped, but it offered some protection from the elements. He built a small fire, using dry leaves and twigs he found nearby. The flames flickered to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. The warmth was a welcome relief. Lila sat huddled by the fire, her face drawn with pain. He knelt beside her, examining her ankle again. "I need to set it," he said. "It's the only way you'll be able to walk on it." Her eyes widened with fear. "Set it? That's going to hurt." He knew it would. He also knew he couldn't sugarcoat it. "It will, but it's necessary." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He hated causing her pain. He wrapped his hands around her ankle, his grip firm. "Ready?" She nodded, her jaw clenched. He pulled. Her scream echoed through the cave, a raw, primal sound that tore at his heart. He held on tight, ignoring the tears streaming down her face. When he was finished, he wrapped her ankle tightly with strips of cloth. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse. She lay back against the cave wall, her body trembling. The pain was still intense, but it was manageable now. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't reply. He felt a surge of guilt, a familiar ache in his chest. He was supposed to protect her, not put her in harm's way. He sat beside her, watching over her as she drifted into a fitful sleep. The fire crackled, casting shadows on her face. He saw the lines of worry etched around her eyes, the faint scars on her hands. She was so young, yet she had already seen so much pain. He wanted to take it all away, shield her from the darkness. But he couldn't. He could only prepare her for it. He knew Barlow wouldn't give up. He would keep hunting them until he found them. They were trapped, wounded, and outnumbered. But they weren't defeated. Not yet. He would protect Lila, even if it meant sacrificing everything. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. He stood and moved to the mouth of the cave, peering out into the night. The forest was silent, but he knew they were out there, lurking in the shadows. Waiting. He pulled his knife from its sheath, the cold steel of familiar comfort in his hand. Let them come. He was ready. The corrupted town dust and a taste of bitter disappointment coated their tongues as they topped the rise. Harmony Creek, once a beckoning beacon, now lay before them like a ravaged skeleton. Buildings stood like hollowed gourds, their dark windows offering no welcome. A stifling quiet pressed down, punctuated only by the rusty weathervane's complaint atop the general store. Lila's limp was a grim rhythm beside Seth, each hobbled step a testament to her spirit. Weariness shadowed her face, a grime mask momentarily lifted by a flicker of optimism that died as they entered the empty square. "It wasn't like this," she breathed, a whisper lost to the rising wind. Seth's gaze swept the desolate expanse, his instincts prickling. This felt wrong. Deeply, irrevocably wrong. "Stay close," he muttered, his hand finding the reassurance of his revolver's grip. The sheriff's office presented itself easily enough. A squat, neglected structure burdened by a sign hanging askew. Inside, a corpulent man with dull eyes occupied a desk buried beneath clutter, idly carving a piece of wood. He didn't acknowledge their arrival. "We need assistance," Seth declared, his tone devoid of warmth. "Supplies? Information?" At last the sheriff's gaze lifted, lingering on Lila before settling on Seth. A slow, unsettling smile warped his features. "Well, ain't this a surprise?" What brings you folks to Harmony Creek? We were attacked, Lila blurted, her voice trembling. My father, he's dead. We need sanctuary. A low, rumbling chuckle emanated from the sheriff, a sound that sent shivers down Seth's spine. Attacked, you say? By whom? Seth advanced a step, his eyes narrowing. By Creek Barlow. The sheriff's smile widened, revealing teeth stained yellow. Barlow, you say? Now, why would I help someone fleeing Creek Barlow? He leaned back, steepling his fingers over his substantial belly. Barlow's a benefactor of this town. Lila gasped, her disbelief etched on her face. Benefactor? He's a murderer. He robbed us of everything. The sheriff's palm slammed against the desk, the reverberation filling the confined space. Watch your tongue, girl. You're in my jurisdiction now, and you'll show respect. Seth's fingers clenched around his revolver. We're leaving. Not so hasty, the sheriff countered, rising to his considerable height. Two figures materialized from the back, faces hard, hands hovering near their own sidearms. I think we need a little chat. Seth moved Lila behind him, eyes darting around the room, seeking an escape. There was none. They were cornered. Seth, what now? Lila whispered, fear lacing her tone. We fight, he replied, his voice a low growl. But before Seth could react, the door flew open. A boy, barely 10, bursting in, terror widening his eyes. They're here! He screamed, voice cracking. Barlow's men are here! A string of curses escaped the sheriff's lips. Get them! He spat at his deputies. Seizing the chaotic moment, Seth grabbed Lila's hand, dragging her toward the back door. They exploded into a narrow alleyway, the sharp reports of gunfire echoing in their wake. Run! Seth roared, shoving Lila ahead. They bolted down the passage, weaving between barrels and crates, the sounds of pursuit gaining ground. They burst onto the main street, only to be met by a throng of townspeople, their paw, faces contorted with animosity. There they are, someone bellowed. Barlow's enemies. The crowd surged toward them, a sea of hostile faces. Seth yanked Lila into a nearby stable, forcing her into an empty stall. Stay here, he commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. I'll hold them off. No, Seth, I won't leave you, Lila pleaded, tears brimming in her eyes. You have to, Seth insisted, his voice steel-edged. I promised your father I'd protect you. Now stay put, and don't emerge until I say so. He turned to face the mob, revolver raised, his gaze unwavering. The burden of his pledge settled heavily upon his shoulders, a weight he'd gladly bear. He would shield Lila, even at his own expense. The crowd faltered, their anger briefly checked by the lethal resolve in Seth's gaze. But only for a heartbeat. With a collective roar, they surged forward, their hunger for Barlow's approval overriding their apprehension. Seth fired, the shots echoing through the town, each bullet a desperate bid for survival. He fought with a savage intensity, his movements fluid and deadly. But he was outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Lila watched from the stall's dim interior, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She could no longer remain hidden. She had to aid Seth. Ignoring the agony in her ankle, she seized a pitchfork from the corner and charged into the fray, her voice a defiant shriek. Leave him alone! The townspeople recoiled, granting Seth a precious moment to recover. Together, they battled their way through the crowd, their backs pressed together, their determination fueled by desperation and the shared instinct to survive. They reached the town's edge, the baying of the mob still ringing in their ears. Without a backward glance, they plunged into the wilderness, abandoning the poisoned husk of Harmony Creek, a grim testament to the corruption that festered in the land. As they fled, Lila stumbled, her injured ankle betraying her. Seth caught her, his arms encircling her protectively. "We have to keep moving," he said, his voice strained. "They won't relent until they have us." Lila met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude, touched by a nascent feeling. "Thank you, Seth," she whispered, "for everything." Seth offered no reply. He simply tightened his grip on her hand and urged her forward, deeper into the unforgiving terrain, towards a future clouded with uncertainty. Bound by a sacred vow and their shared fight for life, the weight of that promise remained. Yet now, it was interwoven with something new, a fierce resolve to safeguard not only Lila but also the fledgling hope sprouting in the parched landscape of his spirit. It appeared that reclaiming Eden demanded more than mere existence. It would also require a readiness to fight for something truly worth living for. A deputy's dilemma, the sun bled across the Harmony Creek horizon as Seth located Caleb, a solitary figure propped against the livery stable. The lawman appeared diminished, the tin star on his chest a leaden burden. Time had etched its passage on Caleb's face, carving deeper lines around his eyes, a mirror of Seth's own weariness. "Caleb," Seth murmured, choosing his words with care. Recognition flickered across Caleb's face, chased by a wave of undisguised relief. "Seth, didn't expect you back." "Certainly not now." He cast a nervous glance around. "We can't be seen together." He nodded toward the adjacent alley. "This way." The passage was a confined space, ripe with the pungent scents of hay and manure. Back pressed against the brick, Caleb's gaze remained fixed on the street. "Heard about James?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I'm truly sorry, Seth." Seth acknowledged him with a nod, the ache of grief a familiar companion. "He was a good man." "The best," Caleb echoed. "Barlow." He spat, the sound sharp in the confined space. "He's infected this whole town." "It's evident," Seth retorted, his voice hard. "The welcome wasn't exactly a celebration." Caleb sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "It's not safe for you here, Seth. You realize that, don't you? Neither of you." "We'll manage," Seth stated, his hand instinctively drifting toward the knife strapped to his side. "Manage how?" A thread of anxiety laced Caleb's question. "You think you can go up against Barlow and his thugs? He owns this town, lock, stock, and barrel." "There has to be a leverage point," Seth pressed. "Something we can exploit." Caleb hesitated, drawing closer, his voice dropping to a near-inaudible whisper. "Barlow? He has a chink in his armor, a significant one." Seth's eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening his gaze. "Which is?" "The mine," Caleb revealed. "The old silver mine up in the hills. James's property, technically. He's consumed by it. Believes it holds more than just silver. Rumor has it there are unusual minerals there, worth untold riches." "He murdered James for it," Seth declared, the truth leaving a foul taste in his mouth. "Not just for the silver itself," Caleb clarified. "He envisions it as his gateway to something grander. Authority, clout, I can't be sure. He practically lives up there, micromanaging the operation. Most of his crew is stationed there too, leaving Harmony Creek pretty deserted, except for the faces he wants to project. So, we aim for his Achilles heel." Seth considered aloud, already piecing together a strategy. "It's perilous, Seth. Utterly perilous," Caleb cautioned. "He has spies everywhere." I'm aware, Seth replied. But we're short on alternatives. A conflict of emotions played across Caleb's face. I can offer assistance, but you must swear secrecy to no one about me. Seth scrutinized him, searching for any sign of deceit. Why, Caleb, why risk everything for us? Caleb averted his gaze, then met Seth's eyes with a newfound resolve. I took an oath to uphold justice, Seth, not to be a tyrant's shield, and you're a good man, always have been. James placed his faith in you. I extend that trust. What Barlow's doing is wrong. Someone has to put an end to it. He paused, a ghost of pain in his eyes. I'm weary of standing on the wrong side of the line. What kind of support can you provide? Seth inquired, a sliver of hope igniting within him. Intel, Caleb responded. Barlow's routines, his objectives, the layout of the mine, patrol schedules, the routes they take. I can procure maps, security specifics. He hesitated. And perhaps some supplies, nothing conspicuous, but enough to shift the odds slightly in your favor. That would be priceless, Seth admitted. How will you manage it without arousing suspicion? I have my ways, Caleb said with a tight, mirthless smile. I'm not entirely ineffective, you know, and Barlow trusts me. He considers me one of his most dependable allies. He confides in me more than he should. Tread carefully, Caleb, Seth warned. Barlow isn't someone to trifle with. I know that better than anyone, Caleb said, his voice edged with steel. Justy promised me you'll exercise caution too, and ensure Lila survives this. I promise, Seth vowed, the weight of the commitment settling heavily on his shoulders. Lila's resilience, her resolve, the spark of optimism that still flickered in her eyes filled his thoughts. He would devote every fiber of his being to safeguarding her. He had no other choice. Meet me here tomorrow night, Caleb instructed. Same hour. I'll have something prepared for you. He darted a nervous glance at the alley entrance. I have to leave. Don't allow anyone to observe you departing. Seth nodded his understanding. Thank you, Caleb. Caleb offered a brief, strained smile. Just to be careful, Seth, and good luck. He turned and vanished into the cavernous interior of the stable, swallowed by the gloom. Seth lingered for a few moments, then emerged from the alleyway, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. Caleb's cooperation was a vital lifeline, a beacon in the enveloping darkness, but it also carried immense risk. Caleb was jeopardizing everything to assist them. Seth could not, under any circumstances, fail him. He retraced his steps toward Lila, the setting sun painting elongated, spectral shadows across the creek. He found her seated near the water's edge, her attention riveted on the restless current. She appeared forlorn, exposed. He settled beside her, the silence hanging heavy between them. I spoke with Caleb, he announced finally. Lila turned, her eyes shimmering with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. And? He's prepared to assist us, Seth said. He's aware of Barlow's obsession with the mine, the hidden minerals. He can provide us with intelligence, maps, provisions. Lila's eyes widened with incredulity. He's going to betray Barlow? He sees it as upholding his oath, Seth explained. He's weary of choosing the path of least resistance. It's a gamble for him, Lila observed, her voice edged with apprehension. A significant one, Seth concurred. We have to proceed with caution. We can't let anything befall him. Lila nodded, her expression hardening into a mask of determination. "We won't. We'll leverage his assistance to bring down Barlow, once and for all, and reclaim what's rightfully ours." Seth regarded her, her unwavering spirit mirroring his own. The commitment he'd made to her father, the promise he'd given Caleb, the vow he'd sworn to himself, they all coalesced into a singular, unshakable resolve. He would safeguard Lila, he would avenge her father's murder, and he would wrest back what Barlow had stolen, even at the cost of his own life. The weight of these promises settled upon him, a heavy but not debilitating burden. They were a heavy load, yes, but also a fount of resolve, a reason to persevere. He looked at Lila, outlined against the fading light, and knew that he wasn't alone in bearing this weight. Together, they would carry it. They would reclaim their lost paradise. The bait dust motes danced in the stale air of the derelict shack, thick with the ghosts of dreams gone bust. Seth honed the edge of his knife, the abrasive scrape a stark contrast to the frantic drumbeat in his ears. Caleb's information was gospel. Barlow lusted after the mine with the fervor of a zealot. Yet, the thought of weaponizing Lila, seemingly oblivious to his torment, idly drew patterns in the dirt floor with a twig. "He fancies himself a cunning fox, doesn't he? Trespassing here, pilfering our legacy." Her voice, soft as it was, resonated with a spine of steel that simultaneously impressed and alarmed Seth. He ceased his sharpening, the blade chiming softly against the silence. "What's brewing in that head of yours, Lila?" She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the bruised hues of an approaching storm. "He's obsessed with the silver, Seth. He craves it with every fiber. Let's offer him a taste, one laced with a bitter surprise." She rose, her slight frame radiating an unexpected aura of command. "I know this land intimately. Every dip, every arroyo, every concealed alcove. I can guide him into a snare he won't even suspect." A knot tightened in Seth's stomach. Her familiarity with the terrain was undeniably their trump card, but the notion of deliberately placing her in harm's way before a predator like Barlow had felt akin to inviting a rattlesnake into their camp. "Absolutely not," he stated, his tone firm, allowing no room for debate. A spark ignited in Lila's eyes. "Absolutely yes. This is my inheritance, Seth. My father's life work. I refuse to cower while that vulture preys upon it." She closed the distance between them, her gaze unwavering. "You pledged to safeguard me, and I'm grateful for that. But sheltering me isn't about locking me away, it's about empowering me to fight." He turned away, raking a hand through his hair. The burden of his solemn promise to James, coupled with the fierce, burgeoning protectiveness he felt for Lila, threatened to suffocate him. "It's far too dangerous. He's merciless, Lila. He'll think nothing of it. And you believe I will?" Her voice was sharp, edged with a hurt he hadn't intended. "Do you imagine I haven't weighed the perils? Do you think I'm ignorant of his capabilities?" She paused, her tone softening ever so slightly. "My father didn't raise a wilting flower, Seth." He turned back, meeting her challenge. He saw not an impetuous girl, but a woman forged in the crucible of grief and hardened by adversity. A woman who refused the role of victim. He glimpsed a reflection of James in her, that same unyielding fortitude, that unwavering devotion to justice. And with a sinking feeling, he recognized that he couldn't deter her. "Walk me through your strategy," he conceded, his voice heavy with resignation. She unfurled her plan, a carefully orchestrated tapestry of strategic locations, natural barriers, and calculated gambles. She possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the mine's surroundings, intimately familiar with its hidden recesses, its treacherous ravines, its perilous shale inclines. She envisioned drawing Barlow into a box canyon, a natural cul-de-sac where they could spring an ambush on him and his cohorts. As she elaborated, Seth absorbed every detail, his mind a whirlwind of analysis, identifying vulnerabilities, pinpointing potential points of failure. He recognized the brilliance of her scheme, the way it harnessed the terrain itself as a potent weapon. However, he also saw the glaring chink in its armor, Lila herself. "It all rests on you," he pointed out, indicating a specific location on the rudimentary map she had etched in the dirt. "You're the lure. If he penetrates the deception, if he anticipates you're exposed." "I'm cognizant of the risks," she asserted, her voice resolute. "But he won't expect me. He casts me as some bereaved daughter, easily cowed. He underestimates me, Seth, and that's his undoing. To underestimate you would be a fatal miscalculation," he affirmed, his voice barely audible. He paused, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken trepidation and burgeoning longing. "But I won't allow him to commit that error." He drew a deep breath, forcing himself to hold her gaze. "We execute this under my watch. I'll remain close, ever vigilant. If anything deviates from the plan, I place my faith in you," she interjected, halting his words. The simple statement, delivered with such unwavering certainty, resonated within him like a physical blow. Trust. It was a currency he hadn't traded in for a long while. And now, this woman, this fierce, resolute woman, was offering it to him unreservedly. He nodded, unable to articulate a response, the weight of her trust settling heavily upon his shoulders. "We depart at first light," he stated, his voice gruff. "We need to reconnoiter the route, ensure every element is in place." As the sun descended below the horizon, painting the heavens in vibrant strokes of ochre and violet, Seth observed Lila as she meticulously cleaned her father's rifle, her movements precise and second nature. He understood that he couldn't guarantee her absolute safety. Not entirely, but he could equip her with the necessary tools, the knowledge, the unwavering support she needed to defend herself. He could stand shoulder to shoulder with her, a bulwark against the impending storm. He approached her, his shadow enveloping her. "Lila," he said, his voice a low murmur, "I need you to grasp something. This isn't merely about vengeance. It's about reclaiming what was unjustly taken from you. Your home, your serenity, your future." She looked up, her eyes luminous in the fading glow. "I understand," she replied softly, "and I'm prepared to fight for it." Seth knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, riddled with uncertainty, and haunted by the ever-present specter of betrayal. But as he gazed upon Lila, her face etched with fierce resolve, he felt a nascent ember of hope ignite within him. Perhaps, against all odds, they could reclaim their Eden. But first, they had to trigger the trap. And the bait had to be willing to wager everything. Into the canyon reeked of parched earth and sun-scalded stone, the air a stifling blanket. Seth's gloved fingers traced the gritty sandstone, still radiating heat despite the fading sunlight. He eyed Lila. Perched on a rocky ledge overlooking the choke point, her resolute expression seemed older than her years. "Positive about this, Lila? One last chance to back out." She remained facing forward. "I'm past backing out, Seth. He stole everything. We're taking it back." Though her tone was even, Seth detected the undercurrent, a barely leashed fury reflecting his own. Argument was pointless. The steel in her gaze mirrored her father's, a vow he couldn't ignore. He sighed, the sound vanishing in the canyon's immensity. "All right. Let's finish this then." Silence descended as they resumed their grim task, a choreography honed by necessity and shared purpose. Seth double-checked the ropes securing the precarious rockfall above, ensuring each was taut. Meanwhile, Lila's meticulous hands blended tripwires with scree and withered foliage, each motion a silent prayer for success, for survival. "How many do you figure he'll bring?" Seth rumbled, the sound barely audible. Lila shrugged, eyes glued to the canyon floor. "Enough. Barlow's avaricious, but not foolish. He'll want overwhelming force to secure the mine." A pause. Then, "Maybe 8? 10? A cold fist clenched in Seth's stomach. 10 hard men, killers all, sworn to Barlow. Even with surprise on their side, it was a daunting prospect. He glanced at Lila, wondering if the reality of their situation truly resonated. "Remember the plan," he said, his voice firm. "Avoid engagement. Let the rocks do the talking." He didn't need to reiterate the importance of her staying hidden, of honoring her promise to remain out of the line of fire. That promise, extracted with difficulty, lay heavy on his conscience. Lila nodded, meeting his gaze. "I know, Seth. No heroics." But he saw a flicker of uncertainty, a shared dread that mirrored his own. Her burning thirst for retribution made her capable of anything. The sun slipped below the canyon's edge, painting long, grotesque shadows across the cliffs. The air turned crisp, carrying the tang of sage and pine. A familiar knot twisted in Seth's gut, the anticipation of bloodshed a frigid weight. He checked his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. He adjusted the knife at his hip, fingers caressing the worn leather sheath. He'd stared into the abyss countless times, but this felt different. This time, Lila's life rested in his hands. A distant tremor vibrated through the ground. Seth tensed, every sense on full alert. Lila rose, her hand instinctively moving toward the rifle slung across her back. The sound grew, the unmistakable cadence of hooves pounding against stone. "They're coming," Lila breathed, barely audible. Seth nodded, eyes fixed on the canyon mouth. A jolt of adrenaline surged through him, primal instinct taking over. He gripped his rifle, knuckles bone white. He scanned the terrain, searching for any sign of flanking maneuvers, any hint of treachery. The first riders spilled into view, framed against the dying light. Seth recognized Barlow at once, his hulking frame and arrogant swagger unmistakable. He was flanked by his henchmen, a ragtag bunch of desperados, faces like granite. Seth held his breath, heart hammering against his ribs. He watched Barlow and his crew advance into the canyon, horses churning up dust. He waited until they were squarely beneath the rigged boulders, fully immersed in the kill zone. He glanced at Lila. Her eyes, wide pools of intensity, met his. A barely perceptible nod, a silent signal. Lila inhaled deeply, her hand hovering above the rope. A moment's hesitation, her gaze locking with Seth's. Fear flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by a fierce resolve. He nodded again, more emphatically. "Do it, Lila." She closed her eyes, then yanked the rope with furious strength. The canyon erupted. Dislodged from their precarious holds, the boulders cascaded down the slopes, slamming into the canyon floor with earth-shattering force. A choking cloud of dust and debris billowed, obscuring everything. Seth watched as Barlow and his men scattered in panic, horses screaming and rearing. The air filled with cries and curses, the sounds of men and animals caught in the merciless descent. He knew this was just the overture. The true battle was yet to begin. But for now, a flicker of grim satisfaction crossed his features. The trap had been sprung. The game was underway, and Creek Barlow had walked directly into its jaws. He tightened his grip on his rifle, a cold smile twisting his lips. He had a vow to uphold, and he intended to see it through, whatever the cost. He knew Lila was watching, awaiting his signal. His only hope was that she would heed his instructions. Ambush the avalanche settled, a suffocating cloud of dust lingering like a death shroud. Seth hacked, the taste of pulverized rock a bitter testament to the brutal event. He risked a glance toward Lila, her features masked with grime, her eyes twin embers mirroring his own resolve. A single nod sealed their agreement. It was go time. He rocked the lever on his rifle, the sharp clack slicing through the ensuing quiet. Below, in the defile, Barlow's crew floundered, disoriented and seized by panic. Ideal. Seth peered down the sights, regulating his breathing, locking onto the nearest target, a thick-necked brute attempting to dislodge a fallen steed from atop a buried comrade. One shot. Precise. The man folded. Lila's rifle cracked beside him, equally lethal. Another lowlife bit the dust. The ambush detonated, and for one exhilarating, savage moment, they commanded the heights, unleashing a storm of lead upon the chaos unfolding below. "Stick to the plan," Seth rasped, his gaze fixed on the canyon floor. His voice, a gravelly undertone, was almost lost amid the din. "Conserve ammunition. Make each round count." Lila offered no reply, her concentration absolute. She moved with a lithe dexterity that belied her years, a natural predator in her element. He had trained her well, yet even he hadn't anticipated the unbridled intensity that burned within her. It was a dangerous beauty, forged in sorrow and stoked by a fierce craving for retribution. The initial pandemonium began to dissipate. Barlow's men, the survivors amongst the casualties, started returning fire, their projectiles buzzing past, peppering the ground around them with stinging grit. Seth felt a fleeting burn across his forearm and dismissed it. He'd endured worse. "They're reforming," Lila warned, urgency tightening her tone. "We need to reposition." They scrambled backward, seeking sanctuary behind a jumble of boulders, the air saturated with the pungent reek of cordite. Their advantage was eroding. Barlow's men were hardened killers, unlikely to remain scattered for long. "How many rounds have you got left?" Seth questioned, swiftly reloading his weapon. 10, Lila responded, her voice strained. "You?" 15. Insufficient. He scrutinized the canyon, his mind racing. They needed a diversion, something to disrupt Barlow's offensive. His eyes landed on a precarious rock overhang higher up on the canyon wall. A risky shot, but it was their only recourse. "Cover me," he instructed, already in motion. Lila unleashed a punishing volley of fire, pinning down the outlaws while Seth scrambled up the treacherous incline. Jagged shale slipped beneath his boots, and the wind howled a mournful tune in his ears, but he pressed onward, propelled by a desperate urge to shield Lila, to see their mission through to its end. He reached the ledge, his lungs ablaze, his muscles screaming in protest. He sighted down his rifle, the crosshairs settling on the formation's weak point. One expertly placed shot below, the firefight intensified. He heard Lila's yelp, a sharp, choked sound that sent a surge of fear coursing through him. He squeezed the trigger. The rock fractured in a violent eruption, showering the outlaws below with a fusillade of stone and debris. Seth didn't pause to assess the outcome. He scrambled back down the slope, adrenaline surging through his system. He found Lila slumped behind a boulder, her face ashen, her left arm dangling uselessly. "Lila!" he shouted, dropping to her side. "Badly wounded?" "Just my arm," she gasped, her voice taut. "A graze. I'll endure." Seth tore open her sleeve, revealing a crimson gash on her forearm. The wound wasn't deep, but it was bleeding profusely. He swiftly fashioned a makeshift bandage, using a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. "We need to evacuate," he urged, his voice tight with concern. "They're going to outflank us." As if to confirm his assessment, a barrage of bullets ripped through the air, forcing them to cower lower behind their meager cover. They were cornered. Seth knew their ammunition was rapidly dwindling, and Barlow's men were closing in. Hope was dimming, replaced by a grim, inescapable reality. They were going to perish here. Then, a fresh cacophony erupted from the canyon entrance. The pounding of hooves, the sharp reports of gunfire, but different. He chanced a glance. A small company of riders, led by a familiar figure, was charging headlong into the melee, weapons blazing. Caleb. "Hold on, Lila," Seth roared, a jolt of adrenaline coursing through him. "We've got reinforcements." Caleb and his posse slammed into Barlow's flank, disrupting their advance, throwing them into disarray. The tide of the conflict was turning. Seth and Lila, emboldened by renewed hope, joined the fray, unleashing a renewed torrent of gunfire. The outlaws, caught in a deadly crossfire, began to waver. Some turned tail and fled, vanishing into the surrounding wilderness. Others fought to the bitter end, their anguished cries echoing through the canyon. The gunfight raged for what seemed an eternity, a chaotic dance of death and destruction. Seth moved through the carnage, a whirlwind of controlled fury, eliminating outlaw after outlaw. He spotted Caleb locked in a brutal close-quarters struggle with a hulking desperado, and with a swift, decisive action, Seth ended it, felling the outlaw with a single shot. At long last, the final members of Barlow's crew were either dead or had scattered. Silence descended upon the canyon once more, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Seth stood amidst the devastation, his rifle dangling loosely at his side, his body battered, his soul weary. He turned to Lila, her face etched with dirt and blood, her eyes reflecting a blend of weariness and elation. She had lived. They had lived. Caleb approached, his expression somber. "Barlow escaped," he informed them, his voice low. "He slipped through the net during the fight." A wave of icy anger washed over Seth. Barlow was still at large. The vow he had made to safeguard Lila remained unfulfilled. "We'll track him down," Seth declared, his voice hardening. "And when we do, he'll answer for his crimes." He met Lila's gaze, his expression unwavering. "I give you my word." The burden of that promise settled upon him, heavy and inescapable. He knew that the struggle was far from over. Barlow would return, and when he did, they would be prepared. Next time, there would be no escape. Next time, it would conclude. Sacrifice the rifle's report shattered the tranquility, carving a jagged wound in the afternoon. Seth spun, weapon rising, but Barlow already had Lila. A scuffle at the wood's edge ended with her being hauled away, kicking, "I creak Barlow." "Seth!" Her scream, a ragged blade of terror, sliced into Seth's soul, a sound he'd carry like shrapnel for the rest of his days. He fired, the bullet thudded harmlessly into the earth as Barlow vanished into the emerald depths, Lila struggling in his grasp. He bolted forward, a searing agony in his muscles, lungs ablaze, but the primal imperative to save her overrode the pain. He plunged into the trees, where the crisp fragrance of pine needles and loam mingled with a coppery twinge his blood. Or worse, Lila's. Barlow! The bellow tore from his throat, vibrating through the timber. Only silence answered. Then, a mocking laugh, disembodied, echoing from the unseen corners of the landscape. "Looking for something, Carter?" Barlow's voice, amplified by the natural acoustics, dripped with malice. "I possess something you desire." Seth stopped forward cautiously, rifle trained on the shifting shadows. "Release her, Barlow. This is between us." "Indeed it is, Seth. Intimately so. But consider Lila collateral." The laugh resonated again, closer this time. Seth advanced, his boots crunching over the fallen foliage. There, in a small glade, Lina was lashed to an oak, her face ashen, a crimson thread trickling from a gash on her head. Barlow stood sentinel behind her, a knife gleaming like a malevolent star at her throat. "One false move, Carter," he rasped, "and she bleeds out." Seth froze, his breath snagging in his throat. Deliberately, he lowered his rifle, each ounce of its weight a brutal reminder of his vow to Seth James, a promise he was failing to uphold. "What do you want, Barlow?" His tone was level, devoid of inflection, but inwardly a tempest raged. "You know damn well what I want, Seth. The vein, the one you're hoarding. Reveal its location, and she walks free." The mineral deposit. Their future hopes, now being bartered. Seth's gaze darted to Lila, her eyes wide pools of fear, silently begging him to resist. He refocused on Barlow, a glacial resolve solidifying within him. "You have my word, Barlow," Seth declared, his voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs. "Tell me how to get her out of this, and I'll take you there myself." A predatory grin stretched Barlow's lips, sending a chill, spider-crawling down Seth's spine. "Precisely what I wished to hear. Loose her, boys." Two figures materialized from the gloom, their expressions hard. They moved toward Lila, and Seth's grip tightened on his rifle, but he held his ground. He had to gamble on Barlow's word. Once Lila was untied, she stumbled toward Seth, her eyes searching his face. "Seth, please, don't," she pleaded, her voice ragged. "It's not worth this price." He met her gaze, his own reflecting a sorrow too profound for words. "I made a promise, Lila. One way or another, I intend to keep it." He addressed Barlow. "Let's go. The site is a few hours by horseback." Barlow gestured towards the deeper woods. "Lead the way, Carter. Any deviation from the agreed plan, anything resembling a trick, and she pays the ultimate price." The trek was an exercise in agony. Each hoofbeat, each soughing breeze, each creak of the saddle served as a stark reminder of the stakes. He glanced back at Lila. She rode in his wake, guarded by one of Barlow's thugs, her face a canvas of worry. He offered a fleeting, reassuring nod, an unspoken vow of protection. They reached the mine's maw as twilight began to bleed across the sky. The air turned frigid, the lengthening shadows transforming the landscape into a study of monochrome. Seth dismounted, each movement measured and controlled. "It's inside," he stated, indicating the inky blackness beyond the entrance. "Unstable, though. Old support beams. A single misstep could bring the whole place down." Barlow followed suit, his eyes blazing with avarice. "Just point me towards the riches, Carter." Seth ventured into the mine, the shadows enveloping him. He heard Barlow and his men dogging his steps, The air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and ore dust. The silence punctuated by the rhythmic plink of dripping water. He led them deeper, past the decaying timbers, towards the heart of the coveted vein. He could feel Barlow's barely restrained excitement. He knew his moment had arrived. "It's here," Seth announced, halting before a solid rock face. "Concealed behind this." Barlow shoved past him, his gaze riveted on the wall. "Break it open," he commanded his men. They surged forward, picks and shovels raised, and began to assault the stone. Seth retreated a step, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the precipice. He cast a glance towards the entrance, where Lila stood, her face a frozen mask of terror and desperation. He locked eyes with her one last time, a silent apology conveyed in that shared look. Then, he slipped his hand into his pocket and retrieved the detonator. Barlow registered the motion, his eyes widening with dawning comprehension. "What do you think you are doing, Carter?" Seth offered a wan, resigned smile. "Reclaiming Eden, Barlow." He depressed the plunger. The explosion convulsed the mine, the earth bucking and heaving, rocks and debris raining down. The ancient support beams groaned, then snapped, the mine collapsing in on itself. Seth squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for oblivion. His father's face flashed before him. Lila's the promise he'd sworn to keep. He had honored his word. He had shielded her. But even as the dust began to settle and the screams faded, a chilling question reverberated through his mind. Had he truly saved her, or merely condemned her to a solitary, grief-stricken existence? Outside the mine, Lila screamed Seth's name, the sound swallowed by the thunderous implosion. She surged forward, desperate to reach him, but one of Barlow's brutes seized her, pinning her arms. "No," she wailed, struggling against his iron grip. "Seth?" The man held her fast, his expression grim. "It's too late," he said, his voice devoid of comfort. "He's gone." Lila stared at the sealed mine entrance, her eyes reflecting only disbelief and bottomless despair. Seth was gone. The man who had delivered her from death, the man she had grown to love, entombed beneath tons of rock and earth. She crumpled to her knees, the immensity of her loss threatening to crush her. His pledge, his sacrifice, resounded in her ears, a testament to his devotion. She was alive, yes, but at what unbearable cost? Barlow stood nearby, his face contorted with rage. His scheme had backfired. The mineral wealth was lost forever, along with Seth Carter. "Get her back on the horse," he snarled at his men. "We're leaving this cursed place." They hauled Lila to her feet, forcing her back onto the saddle. She offered no fight, her spirit extinguished, her heart irrevocably broken. As they departed the decimated mine, Lila glanced back one final time. The setting sun cast elongated, ominous shadows across the scarred terrain, bathing the scene in hues of blood and shadows. Seth was gone, and with him, a fragment of her very being. The Eden they had strived to secure had been consumed by darkness, leaving behind a legacy of devastation and self-sacrifice. Buried alive, the mountain bellowed its rage. Seth shoved Lila down, his body a bulwark against the impending destruction. In that fleeting instant before the dynamite detonated, he glimpsed raw terror etched on her face, a stark reflection of the dread he usually kept locked away. He cradled her head against his chest, the coarse wool of his coat a comfort against her skin, murmuring, "Just hold on." Then oblivion erupted. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of fracturing stone, splintering wood, and the overwhelming roar of a mountain collapsing inward. Dust swirled. a suffocating cloud that stung his eyes and rasped in his throat. The force of the blast hammered him, a savage wave attempting to rip them apart. Detritus cascaded down, some pieces glancing off him, others striking with stunning blows. He fought the pain, his entire being focused on shielding her, a vow made manifest. Abruptly, the chaos ceased, replaced by a ringing, oppressive silence, heavier than the rockfall that now entombed the mine. He struggled to rise, spinning grit and pebbles. Lila lay still beneath him. "Lila!" His voice, ragged and hoarse, echoed in the silence. Carefully, he brushed the grime from her face, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Her eyelids flickered, her gaze unfocused. "Seth?" she croaked, her voice thick with dust. "What happened?" "The mine," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper. I set the blast." He helped her to a sitting position, his eyes scanning her for injuries. A laceration on her brow, a graze on her arm, but apparently nothing broken. Relief, sharp and unexpected, bloomed within him. He had kept her safe. "Barlow," she began, memory returning with a jolt. "He's still in there?" Seth offered a bleak nod. "With his men. They won't be causing trouble anymore." She stared at the blocked entrance, her features draining of color. You entombed them alive." The words were a breath, laced with horror. He met her gaze steadily. "They made their choices, Lila. They sought greed and violence. They found it." He knew she couldn't comprehend it, not yet. She hadn't witnessed the depravity he had, hadn't known the chilling grip of desperation that forced a man to such extremes. Butte. Her eyes searched his, a complex mixture of fear and, was it, understanding? "You were in here too, Seth. You could have been killed." He dismissed her concern with a flick of his hand. "Didn't happen." He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound that betrayed him. Something felt amiss, deep within. Each breath was a searing agony. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his forearm. "Seth, you're injured." Following her gaze, he looked down. A dark bloom was spreading across his shirt, blossoming like a grotesque flower. He hadn't registered it in the adrenaline-fueled aftermath. He pressed a hand to his side, flinching. A shard of rock must have impaled him during the collapse. "It's nothing. A scratch," he lied, his voice unconvincing even to himself. Suddenly, a shout cut through the stifling silence. "Lila! Seth!" Relief flooded Lila's face. "It's Caleb. They're here." She scrambled to her feet, calling out, "We're here. Help us." The muffled shouts grew louder, nearer. Then, the scrape of shovels against rock, the grunts of strained effort. An eternity later, a sliver of light pierced the darkness. The hole widened, revealing Caleb's anxious face, smeared with dirt and sweat. Behind him, Seth saw other townsfolk, their faces etched with worry. "Lila! Thank God you're alive!" Caleb exclaimed, scrambling through the opening and pulling her into a fierce embrace. "We saw the explosion we feared." His words trailed off, unable to voice the terror that had consumed them. Lila clung to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Seth, he saved me, Caleb. He saved my life." Caleb turned to Seth, his expression morphing from relief to alarm. "Seth, you're bleeding!" He rushed to his side, his eyes widening at the sight of the crimson stain saturating his shirt. "We need to get him out of here. Now!" The townsfolk surged forward, their faces set with determination. They carefully helped Lila through the opening, then focused their attention on Seth. He attempted to stand, but a wave of nausea washed over him, and he faltered. Caleb and another man, Silas, steadied him, their strong arms supporting him. "Easy, Seth," Caleb said, his voice tight with concern. "We've got you." As they half carried, half dragged him toward the opening, Seth's vision swam. Each breath sent a searing lance through his side. He knew, with a stark certainty, that this was far more than a scratch. He glanced back at Lila, who stood just outside the mine entrance, her face a portrait of anguish. Their eyes locked, and in that fleeting moment, he saw everything he had ever craved, reflected in her gaze. Trust, gratitude, and something deeper. Something that momentarily eclipsed the pain, replaced by a bittersweet ache. He managed a ghost of a smile. "I promised," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I promised you'd be safe." Then darkness consumed him. Love in the dust sunbeams cut through the gloom of the collapsed mine, illuminating a swirling cloud of gritty particles. The air tasted of pulverized rock and a sharp, metallic tang Seth's blood. Lila, perched beside him, pressed a shredded piece of her skirt against the wound in his side. Her fingers slick with crimson. The sluggish flow stained the makeshift bandage. His face, a canvas of pain, was unnervingly still. Too still. She wiped at the smudges on his brow, her fingertips grazing the rough shadow of his beard. Each shallow inhale he drew felt like a hard-won battle against the encroaching shadows. Tears tracked paths through the grime on her cheeks, a mixture of despair and sweat. She refused to lose him, not after everything they'd endured. "Seth!" she croaked, her voice raw with panic. "Seth, please! Don't you dare give up on me!" She tore another strip of fabric, cinching the bandage tighter. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely grip the material. The pressure seemed to spark a fresh wave of agony, a subtle tightening of his brow. He hadn't uttered a word since the blast, his eyes remaining stubbornly shut. She'd hauled him clear of the collapsing tunnel, her own body screaming in protest, fueled by a surge of desperate strength. Now that adrenaline ebbed, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She recalled his hand shielding her back, guiding her away from the explosion's force. He'd thrown himself between her and the danger, as he always did. A wave of corrosive guilt flooded her. It was her fault. He lay here, bleeding, because of her choices. "It's going to be okay," she declared, the assurance ringing hollow in the desolate space. "I'm getting you out of here." She attempted to lift him, but his weight was unyielding, a dead burden in her arms. A vise tightened around her throat. She was stranded, swallowed by the earth, with a man teetering on the edge of oblivion. Lowering him gently, she let her tears fall freely, spotting his face with saline droplets. She didn't bother to stem the flow. "Damn you." "Seth Carter," she choked out. "Why must you always be so infuriatingly stubborn? So selfless?" She leaned close, her breath ghosting across his ear. "I don't want you to die, Seth. I can't do this without you." The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken truths, feelings she had desperately tried to suppress, burying them under layers of pragmatism and self-preservation. But here, in the mind's suffocating grip, with the man she loved slipping away, there was no room for such denial. She loved him. She loved his quiet fortitude, his unwavering devotion, the crow's feet that appeared when he almost smiled. She cherished the sense of security he gave her, even as the world crumbled around them. "I love you, Seth," she whispered, the confession a desperate prayer. "I love you so much." She pressed her forehead against his. closing her eyes. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged symphony of his breaths. She waited, her pulse hammering in her ears, for a sign, a flicker of awareness. Then she felt it, a subtle tremor against her cheek, a fragile, almost non-existent squeeze of her hand. Her eyes snapped open, her breath hitching. His eyelids flickered. Slowly, achingly, his eyes opened, clouded with pain, unfocused at first. Recognition, like a sunrise, gradually dawned. He met her gaze, his eyes searching, questioning. "Lila?" he managed, his voice a mere rasp. "I'm here," she affirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here, Seth." He blinked, struggling to gain focus. A faint smile brushed his lips. "You, all right?" he slurred. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just to stay with me." He coughed, a brutal sound that racked his body. A trickle of blood traced a path from the corner of his mouth. "Heard you?" he breathed, his voice fading to a whisper. "Heard me what?" she pressed, her heart hammering against her ribs. He struggled to maintain focus, his eyes threatening to close again. She gently shook his shoulder. "Seth, stay awake. Please, stay with me." His eyes flickered open once more, locking onto hers. There was a depth of emotion there she hadn't witnessed before. "Love you," he uttered, the words barely audible. Her breath caught, snagged in her throat. He loved her. After all this time, through all the silence, he loved her. "I love you too, Seth," she confessed, her voice trembling like a leaf. "More than anything in this world." A genuine smile graced his lips, weak but unmistakable. "Knew it," he breathed. Then his eyelids drifted shut. His grip on her hand slackened. His breathing became shallow, erratic. "Seth!" she cried, shaking him more urgently. "Seth, don't you dare give up on me. Not now." She pressed her ear to his chest, straining to hear a heartbeat. It was there, thready but persistent. He was still alive. But how much time did they have? She needed to get him out of here. She needed assistance. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to regain control. Panic wouldn't help. She needed a plan. She couldn't lift him unaided. She had to devise a way to transport him to the surface. Her gaze swept the devastated mine, searching for anything that could be of use. A discarded wooden plank, half buried in the rubble, caught her attention. It was long and solid. It could work. She seized the plank, wrestling it free from the debris. It was cumbersome, but she succeeded in maneuvering it. Carefully, she slid the plank beneath Seth's body, creating a makeshift stretcher. It was a rough solution, born of desperation, but it was the best she could manage. Another deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. It would be arduous, perhaps impossible, but she had to try. For Seth's sake, for her own, for the future they might yet salvage. Gripping one end of the plank, her muscles screamed with the effort. She took a tentative step forward, then another. Slowly, laboriously, she began to drag him toward the mine's entrance, toward the beckoning light, toward the faintest glimmer of hope. Dust billowed around them, gilded by the sun's anemic rays. It was a scene of utter devastation, yet in that moment, amidst the wreckage, Lila felt something more than despair. She felt a fierce, unyielding resolve. She would save him. She had to. Their love, forged in the crucible of tragedy, deserved the chance to flourish.